Hello everybody, Chris here, and in this video I want to show you guys how we can create a call-out title or a little pop-up that's going to detail information about a product or possibly a location that's inside of our shot. So this 3D fusion composition is going to be done completely from scratch, so you got to open up the effects library and go down to generators in order to grab the fusion composition generator. So when you've put your fusion composition in the clip, make sure that it's selected and then go over to the Fusion tab. So here you should see nothing but a media out, and in order to create this pop-out, we're going to primarily need shapes and text elements. So let's start by adding in a couple 3D texts. And for the node that I'm working on, I'm going to right-click and do View on Left View so that we can see exactly what we're creating. So for the text 3D, I'll go ahead and put in some dummy text for right now. So let's say something like Test Drawing Tablet. Now we'll worry about resizing it later, but we might want to change the font. So I like to use the font Big Noodle Titling for doing titles, obviously. So I'll leave it like that for now. So with this 3D text, at some point we're going to need to merge it with other elements. So rather than just outputting it straight to a renderer, I'm going to add in a Merge 3D over here on the toolbar. And then I will take that Merge 3D and put it to a renderer, which then goes to Media Out. So the Merge 3D combines elements, the renderer makes it viewable as a 2D image, and that 2D image gets sent to the media output, which we can actually view in our timeline and our final video. So we can see here that the text is way too big, so I might actually shrink the size down a lot here. So I'll make it something like 0.25 for now. And now I'm going to also want to put a background for this Test Drawing Tablet title. So to do that, we need to add in a 3D shape. So I'm going to have Merge 3D selected here and click on 3D shape so you can see how it automatically gets connected. So with this plane, we're going to need to change the shape and size of it a little bit. And we are also going to need to change the color so that it actually works as a background. So let's make it, I guess, something like a bluish for right now. And now let's go over to the Transform tab over in the inspector and make the Z offset -0.01, and this will put it ever so slightly behind the text in 3D space. So now that we can see the title hovering above the plane, we can easily reshape this plane. So I'm going to unlock the XYZ scale for the plane, and I'm going to decrease the Y scale because it's currently way too tall. And I'll increase the Y scale a little bit to make it slightly larger horizontally than the title. And let's also adjust the Y offset, moving it up a little bit. If you get to the point where just a little bit of moving makes it too dramatic of a difference, you can always type in the number you want instead. So I might increase this just a bit. Now for this case, I'm going to prefer to have the text centered, so I'm going to make the X offset -0.01 or so. Okay, now that's pretty much lined up there for right now, but come to think of it, when we add in extra text elements that are going to pop out here, I want them all to align along the left side. So back in the 3D text, I'm going to go to the horizontal anchor and I'm going to choose left. Now that's going to push it over to the right because the anchor point is somewhere around here. And because of that, we're going to need to adjust the transform of the text as well. So X offset, let's just kind of center that. So -0.58 works for me. And now with this little pop-out title, I can actually duplicate this 2 more times. So I'm going to select the text 3D, the shape 3D, and the merge 3D. I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it in 2 more times. So each of these are kind of its own separate group. And since we have 3 of these individual groups, we're going to want 1 more merge. So we're going to merge the merges. So let's add in a merge over here. And let's drag all of the individual merges to this final merge. So we have 3 groups and then they all combine into one final merge output, and that gets rendered. Okay, so you probably can't tell that there's 3 text elements here right now because they're all hovering right on top of each other. And it would be a little bit of a pain to individually move the text 3D and the shape 3D individually. So what we can actually add is a transform in between the merge 3D and the final merge. So by having a transform node here, we'll be able to move this group as one unit rather than having to adjust them individually. So to add a transform 3D, we'll go into right click, add tool, 3D, and then transform 3D, and make that the in-between step before getting to the merge. And we can take that transform 3D and copy it 2 more times here. So now this merge is going to go to that transform, which is going to go to the final merge. And this one is going to go to that transform and then to the final merge. If we want it to align better, we can right click and do line up all tools to grid. Usually that helps make it a little bit more clear what we're looking at. So now with these transforms, namely the bottom 2, I'm going to adjust the Y offset and pull them down a little bit. So you see how we bring them down here and it adjusts both the text 3D and the shape 3D all as one thing. It makes it a lot simpler. So now let's bring this one down here too. We probably want them to be exactly the same distance from each other because that will look better. So I'll actually take the Y offset from the second node and I'll double that for the third one. So I think we can do math by doing multiplied by 2 here. Yeah, we can. So the total Y offset for the third one becomes negative 0.464. And you can see how they're evenly spaced from each other. So now we're going to want to change the color of the bottom shapes. If they're all blue, that's kind of boring. So I'm going to only change what kind of color it is, but I'm going to be leaving the hue and the saturation alone so that the colors are a bit more consistent. And the bottom shape, maybe we adjust that over towards something like a purple. Really, you can use whatever colors you want. So whatever you think looks good to you, go with that. And I think I want to change the font for the bottom text elements. So I'm going to change this to something else. Babus Nue is pretty good, but that's still more of a title option. So let's just kind of go down here and see if we can find one that looks good. So I went ahead and changed the font to Liberation Sans here, but I'm also going to lower the font size down. And what you'll notice is because we changed the horizontal anchor before, it's always going to be lined up with that top text. So that means we're never going to need to realign the 3 different text elements to be in line with each other. So let's also change the bottom text there to Liberation Sans, or you can really use whatever font you want. And I'll make the size 0.18 as well. So for the text itself, we can say something like maybe it has 4,048 pressure levels. Okay, and then maybe that's still a little big, so we'll make that 0.15. And the price is $49.99. Why not? So because we had a vertical anchor that was centered, when we resize it, it also loses its position a little bit. So let's actually take the anchor of all 3 and make them a top anchor so that when we resize it, it doesn't lose its position so much. So let's see, text. And now we need to adjust all 3 of them vertically a bit. So let's change the Y offset there and the Y offset for the second one as well. Okay, so let's make that 0.1, get it kind of centered. And then with the third one, we will increase it as well. But now, if I'm not wrong, whenever we change the size of the text now, it should keep existing in that center area. The position shouldn't change. So let's try that. We can see that in terms of its position, it won't change vertically, but if our text gets too big, we would still need to adjust it. Okay, so now we're going to need another section to basically put a marker on the screen. What are we actually pointing to and talking about with this text information? So to do that, we'll need a separate section up here, and we will create that using 3D shapes. So I'm going to get started with a sphere shape. And I will view this on the left-hand side until we connect it. I know that we're going to need a merge 3D here because there's going to be more than one shape. And we can combine this with the merge 2D there, the final merge. And now we'll be able to see it in the media out as well. So I'm going to actually drag down on this node section a little bit so we can see more about what appears on screen. Clearly the sphere is going to be way too big, so let's shrink the radius by quite a bit, maybe down to something like 0.1 even. And then we need to adjust its position. So let's make it go over something like here. And for right now, that looks okay. So I'm going to hit F2 to rename this shape, and I'll call this circle to be more clear what kind of shape we're dealing with. And I'll add in another shape here. I'll call this box 1 because this is going to be more of a rectangle, and I'll connect that to the merge 3D. And, okay, so with the box 1, I'm going to scale its horizontal size way down. So let's shrink that, make it a lot thinner. Maybe something like 0.15 or 0.1 even. And now we can adjust its position, probably decrease its Y scale a little bit, and pull it down here. Okay, so this can serve as a kind of a connector between our 3 information pieces. But we may actually want to put more distance between this little circle and our text area. After all, the object we're pointing to, we probably don't want to cover that completely. So once again, rather than manually adjusting all of these nodes over here on the left, what I'm going to do is just add a transform 3D node. And I'll add that to this 3D merge. But I'm also going to separate this section, the circle and the box, to come over here and only be in a final output. So that's going to mean one more merge in between. And yeah, I know there's a lot of merges, but mostly it's just so that we can separate our sections. And then in between here, we'll have a transform element. So to add the transform, right click, add tool, 3D, transform, put it in between this merge, and then we connect that to the final output there. And now if we want to adjust this section, we can just do this all as one thing. So I'm going to actually pull our transform about 0.2 out. And I'll also adjust the box to get over there as well, positioning it where we want it. And the circle can maybe go up a bit. Now, you might be wondering, does it matter if we see the product behind here right now? Well, not so much, because when we actually go to use this 3D composition, we can scale and adjust basically its position on the screen with the final transform, so it shouldn't be a problem for us. Now let's go ahead and add one more box in. So I'm going to do that by copying the first box and duplicating that and adding that to this merge. So we're going to call this box 2. And with this one, I want to connect the circle to this line over here. So I'm going to pull this out here, right around there, and we're going to rotate it on the Z axis. Probably going to want to scale down the Y as well to right around there. And with the circle, we can increase that a little bit. Maybe we want the second box to be a little bit thinner. So I'll scale down the X scale by half as well, so 0.05. And we can do the same with the first box. So now we just need to line up the ends of these boxes a little bit more so it looks better. So let's go over here, and maybe we type this in so it's more precise once again. So let's see, 0.5 is the wrong direction, so 0.48. And then let's move this box up just a bit, and the X offset just a bit. And that's roughly right, but we can get closer. Okay, so that actually looks pretty good there now. You can obviously spend as much time as you want to get it perfect. So the circle as well is not quite there, so I'm going to adjust that just a tad. And now we're really close to having the basic frame of our effect. Now, if all these nodes are becoming a little much for you, feel free to group them. So I'm going to select all of these elements over here leading up to this first transform, and I'm going to select them, and I'm going to Control G to group them. And we will call this group text and background. So that clears up our screen a lot. We can also do the same up here if we want. So we can group by right-clicking and going to group, and maybe we call this group the location indicator. You can probably think of a better name. But by using those groups, it really clears up this node section for us. So in order to make this effect animated, I'm going to have the pieces kind of slide out onto the screen. So we can do that by animating our individual components as the timeline progresses. So be sure that you're animating from frame 0. And I'm going to also set keyframes at the points where I want these pieces to be completely in place, so their final location. So I'll start by animating the circle and the boxes as they slide out. So on frame 10, I'm going to put a keyframe for their X and Y offset, both the circle and box 2, possibly box 1 later, but definitely those two. And now I can go to frame 0, and I can set where I want this circle thing to start from. So if I make it over here, then that's going to mean it starts off screen. If I hit space now, it's going to slide out onto the screen. So let's leave that for there, and I'll go to box 2 for frame 0. And let's set this to come from the top of the screen. So I'm going to be making its offset up there at the top, and I can hit space, and you can see how they kind of slide in there together. So we could do the same with the first box. So I'm going to set a keyframe for their Y and X offset at frame 10. I'm going to go to frame 0, and I'm going to move it down here below the screen. So now all three of those pieces are going to move into place. It looks all right. Maybe we'll make it a little bit more complicated in a bit. But for right now, we can leave that alone. Now, because we grouped our text and background with a transform over here, we can actually animate all of this as one thing. So I might say that at frame 0, it's going to be completely off screen, and we won't actually move this piece in until we get to frame 10. So we'll have it be a 10 frame animation, which means that at frame 20, it's going to be completely done, and at frame 10, it's going to be off screen. So let's move it over here to the right at frame 10, which should mean that it's also off screen before frame 10 because of how keyframing works. So if we hit space now, it'll look something like that. Okay, so one more thing we might want to do is change the color of this circle over here, differentiate it from these boxes that are popping out. So I'm going to take the color and give it something a little bit more interesting. So I might make that something like a light to dark blue. I think that looks all right. And now what we also might want to have happen is to take all of these elements and kind of fade them in somehow as time progresses. So one way that we can have all of this 3D composition animate as it enters is to take this renderer 3D, and before we have our final media output, we actually add in a brightness contrast node. So I'm selecting the renderer 3D, adding that in, which automatically connects it to media out. And then with this brightness contrast node, I'm going to go to frame 20 where it's completely animated in, and I'm going to set some keyframes for whatever I might want to change, whether that's gamma, contrast, brightness, saturation. And then we'll go to the point in our animation where we want the color or the appearance to start fading in again. And I'll start by setting the brightness to 0 there. So that's going to mean that it's going to go from completely black at frame 10 to completely visible at frame 20. So let's see how that looks. So at frame 0, it's basically black shapes that are moving into place. But then as the full effect fades in, it gets its color, and then we're able to see everything in the final output. So this is just one way that you can animate your title as it comes into the screen. But hopefully I'm giving you an idea of how you can work with all these nodes to create what you have in mind. So we have our effect here. Seems pretty good so far. So let's actually put it into practice. So over on the Edit tab, we have our fusion composition here. But let's see how it actually looks when we animate it. So I'm going to hit space here. And the first time it renders, it's going to have a red bar at the top because it hasn't really pre-rendered. But if we play it back a few times, you should be able to get it to appear on the screen a little bit more readily. Now you'll notice, of course, that the position that it's pointing at, it's not actually where the tablet's at. So we're going to want to adjust this on our screen. Now you can use the inspector transform controls over here by doing something like shrinking it down or adjusting its position. But what you may also notice is that by doing that, by shrinking the zoom, that the frame for the fusion composition no longer goes to the top of the screen. So we're actually able to see where the cutoff line is right around there. So there's actually a better way to do that. So rather than reducing the size of our fusion composition frame or moving its position, let's set that back to 0, 0. We can actually add in one more transform on the fusion tab. So I'm going to do that. Let's go over to where this renderer 3D is. And before we get to that final render 3D, let's add in one more transform control. So we move that to there, and then this will be the final transform output. So I'll give it a name that kind of reflects that. And what we can do with our entire Fusion composition here is adjust the offset. So I can just move this over here with one control, adjusting the entire animation. And when we go back over to our Edit tab, it's moved it, but without affecting the frame itself. So let's play it back one more time and see how that looks. So you can see that it's still coming from the top of the frame. Now you may notice that some of the pieces are kind of hanging there at frame 0. So we can fix that by going and adjusting those individually, making them come from a little further out. Let's go ahead and do that. But aside from that, having that one final transform makes it really easy to adjust the position of our callout title. Now we might also say it's a little bit big, so we can go ahead and adjust the size of that too. So with the final transform, I can decrease the scale by a bit, so make it something like 0.90 and then adjust the position a little bit more so that it's not really getting in the way. And that'll affect how it looks for us in the final render. Now just note that whenever you do adjust the transform, it might pull some of those pieces out of place. So if you need to, just go back in and adjust the transform, making sure that they're out of the screen. But aside from that, it should be pretty easy to make those small adjustments. So let's play it back one more time. And we kind of get our final effect there. And with the transform control, we can kind of reuse this. So now we have a really cool adjustable custom 3D Fusion composition that we can use for callout titles in our video to give some details about products or locations on the screen, whatever you want to call out and give information about. So I hope that this tutorial has shown you guys a lot about using the 3D Fusion tab. I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in my future video content.